Welcome to the Hammer Territory Podcast. My name is Shawn Coleman. A pleasure to be back with you. Hope wherever you are and wherever you are listening, you are having a great start or great into your Wednesday, good or Thursday, good start to your Friday. And for the first time in the Hammer Territory era, I am very proud to be joined by Scott Coleman. Scott, how are you doing, sir?
Hey, Shawn, I'm great. It is nice to do our official Hammer Territory Coleman Squared podcast with each other. We, of course, did quite a few of them back in the day on battery power, but the Colemans are uniting. Our good friend Stephen Tolbert, I believe, is catching some Braves baseball this weekend in Washington, D.C., so I am returning the favor and filling in here on a Thursday night. But a really nice win for the Braves. It was not really looking that way early on, but a nice win. And as Brad and I talked about the other night on the podcast, it really just feels like this team needs to start beating the bad teams if they're going to really make a push this summer.
Absolutely, absolutely. And of course, for those who have listened in over the past few weeks, Scott, of course, is making his triumphant return from, his travels in Europe. But Scott, I have it on good authority that you actually have been banned from the city of Rome for two reasons. Number one, you tried to start an illegal wiffle ball home run derby in the Roman Coliseum, and you also tried to do it with a corked bat. Can you confirm those rumors?
I cannot confirm nor deny. I was sworn to secrecy, but that does sound pretty cool. We did, for those who don't know, I was in Italy with my wife for a couple of weeks, and we did check out the Colosseum. It was fascinating, especially for somebody with an interest in history. And for any listeners who have ever been on the fence about going overseas and visiting Italy, I cannot recommend it enough. We had a fantastic time. The food was unbelievable. It was just a great place and nice to get away for a couple of weeks.
Absolutely, and of course, obviously, this podcast itself is, at its best with Scott here, and the reason why is because of his great insights. So certainly glad he had a great trip and glad to have him back. But Scott, let's dive right into it. As you mentioned, coming off, their first shutout in 182 games on Wednesday, the Braves come into a Thursday facing Mitchell Parker. I believe that's the pitcher. Yeah, Mitchell Parker for the second straight time. And the man just looked like he was unhittable with the Braves lineup for the first 5 innings. Reynaldo Lopez looked good as well. And we'll start with Reynaldo Lopez. We'll get into the offense in just a bit. But Reynaldo Lopez, Brad, as bad as the Braves offense was, Reynaldo Lopez was just as good. It is what really stands out. We'll also get into this point in a bit. What really stands out is Reynaldo Lopez had some good swing and miss stuff, but just so efficient, consistently getting hitters and pitchers counts, making good pitches, getting out of jams. He did run into a bit of trouble in the sixth inning, but was able to work around the two extra singles that he gave up. The efficiency once again was there, able to complete 6 innings and keep the Braves in it so they could eventually come back. Another great performance from Reynaldo.
Yeah, we're almost running out of good things to say about Lopez because he's just been so efficient and so good every single time he goes out there. You mentioned the back-to-back home runs he gave up in the sixth inning was really the only blemish of the whole night. And it was almost, I believe it was 5 weeks since Reynaldo had last given up a home run. And I mean, just speaks to what he's been able to do. He had the swing and miss stuff working, not a lot of hard contact other than the couple of home runs. And even one of the home run pitches he gave up wasn't even a bad pitch, just a good job by CJ Abrams to go up and get the ball. Really just cannot be said enough, just what Reynaldo has meant to this rotation. He's very likely going to be an all-star at this point, unless he just completely falls apart, which really there's nothing pointing towards that happening. Very much a deserving candidate for an all-star spot right now. And you think about what the Braves have had to overcome this season to get to this point, about 10 games above 500. A big old part of that is what Reynaldo Lopez has been able to do in the rotation.
Absolutely. And it's great to see him. He's been so good at home, but he's also been very good on the road, and that showed up again as well today. But speaking of being on the road, we mentioned that our fellow co-host, Stephen Tolbert, he's actually on the road this weekend, going to be able to enjoy the Braves and the Nationals, also the Braves and the Orioles. And Scott, I know that you like to catch the Braves on the road as well, but I'll tell you this, a great source to be able to do that is SeatGeek. I think you could speak to, having a one-stop shop to be able to go to when you're trying to find Braves tickets, especially on the road. That's a great source to be able to rely on.
Yeah, I think one of the coolest things is whenever you turn on a Braves game or you're at the stadium, just how many Braves fans travel with the team. You could hear them on Thursday night cheering, especially as the Braves had their rally late. Always cool to be surrounded by Braves fans.
SeatGeek is the official, if you're looking as a Braves fan to attend these games, SeatGeek is a great place because it's the official ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball. So they have you covered for all of your baseball ticket needs. Baseball season is in full swing and you don't want to miss out. SeatGeek has your tickets to every game. But Scott, as I know, a lot of fans in Braves country know, you're a Colts fan, you're an Arizona Wildcats fan, a St. Louis Blues fan. Having SeatGeek in place to be able to cater to all your sports or concert needs, that's really a great function of the site.
It is. My sports alliances are all over the place, a product of moving around a bunch as a kid and being all over the place. But yes, always good to be at the arena no matter where it is. And yeah, let's hope, man. Next couple of weeks, the Braves have some big games on the horizon. It'd be great to be at the stadium if you're able to travel with the team.
28 million downloads, 70,000 events on SeatGeek. And the great thing about it is that they are one place that you know you're getting a good deal. And they'll actually rate your tickets on a scale of 1 to 10. Look for the green dots, that's a good deal. The red dots mean it's not so good. And if you do it now, we have a great offer for you. If you use the code HAMMER, you'll get $20 off tickets at SeatGeek. Again, that's $20 off your first ticket purchase with promo code HAMMER. Make sure you click the link in the description of the download to be able to get the tickets through SeatGeek for your favorite sports or concert event. So, Scott, we talk about how good Reynaldo Lopez has been. We talk about how good Max Fried has been, Chris Sale, obviously, Charlie Morton at times as well. But what really stands out to me, Stephen mentioned this last week when we were doing our one of our podcasts. He mentioned that the Braves have had the fourth fewest bullpen innings this season. Now, a big reason for that is the Braves, I still think, have played the fewest games in the majors this season. But what stands out is that this Braves bullpen has been able to be used at a very, less of a rate than it has been in the past because our starters are consistently going 6 to 7 innings. But it's not like our starters are racking up 110, 120 pitches. The efficiency of our starters is really standing out as a strength of this team. Coming into tonight's game, the Braves were second in the majors in terms of the total percentage of their pitches that resulted in a non-foul strike, a foul tip, a called strike, swinging strike, a block strike, what have you. And they had the fourth lowest amount of their pitches that resulted in a ball. The efficiency of this starting rotation really stands out as a strength of this team, and it's one that could really pay off as we get closer to the playoffs.
Yeah, it's only going to help. And for a couple of reasons, of course, keeping these guys fresh is going to be important, but especially the bullpen. I think we've all seen by August and September, some of those bullpen arms, whenever they're making their 70th appearance of the season, it's just natural to kind of wear down a bit. The velocity starts to go, the command starts to go. It's only going to help. And we know that the margin for error has become much smaller in the rotation, especially without Strider healthy. But as long as Lopez and Sale and Morton and especially Max Fried, I mean, whenever they work deep into those games in the sixth and seventh inning, it just only makes life easier when we know this lineup is just not producing on a consistent basis. Basically, every night, the Big Four has given the Braves a chance to win for really the entire season. It's just a matter of hoping the offense helps them out at some point and makes it just quite not so reliant on needing a perfect starting performance every night out of the rotation.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, Scott, that I think it helps out with is, people are starting to look at, hey, Chris Sale, Reynaldo Lopez, we're getting into, 2.5 months of them being in the starting rotation. Of course, Reynaldo Lopez, I think tonight, came close to or exceeding his, innings amount that he pitched, over his pitch more innings this year than he had either of the previous 2 years. Chris Sale with his injury history, but the efficiency that they're pitching with, even though they're racking up some innings, they're not throwing a lot of hard or high stress strikes. So even in the Braves themselves, they don't really put a lot of emphasis on innings counts. But the point that I'm getting at is even if the innings start to rack up and they'll continue to do so, the fact that efficiency will hopefully remain and they'll continue to throw strikes, that will allow for them to continue to be productive for the Braves without it wearing on them and hopefully keep them in line for the playoffs. Seeing Reynaldo and Sale, especially as their innings rack up, their efficiency is really going to pay off for them to remain key parts of the rotation.
Yeah, and I'm curious to see what, if anything, the Braves do over the next couple of months to manage their workloads. You mentioned that Reynaldo Lopez just surpassed or is going to surpass his innings from the past couple of years. This is a guy who has not been a starter for 5 or 6 years. So he's probably not going to be able to throw 180 innings this season. Maybe, I guess it's not impossible, but I think the Braves, even if they wouldn't say it publicly, or at least starting to think about ways to trim back his innings a little bit with the hope of having Reynaldo healthy and efficient in September and hopefully deep into October. And the same for Chris Sale. And it'd be nearly impossible to start limiting Sale right now because he's been quite literally one of the best arms in all of baseball. But we know that Sales also has a lengthy injury list at this point in his career. Charlie Morton's 40 years old, right? So you have to keep these guys healthy and fresh. And I think it's really just going to be on a week by week basis. But again, you just cannot say enough good things about the rotation. It has been so good, really, from opening day. It's a big reason why the Braves, even with the offense being up and down, they're still very much in it. And last I looked, I think they're 6 back of Philadelphia with a whole bunch of baseball to go. Maybe it has not been a perfect start for the team by any means, but the rotation is such a big part of why the Braves are in it.
So we know the rotation is why the Braves are in it. The lineup obviously is what has to improve for them to be truly where they want to be. And what stood out tonight, Scott, was yes, there was, obviously struggles for the first 2/3 of the game, but, get some good injury news over the past couple of days. Of course, Sean Murphy on Tuesday night, he had the elbow flare up, but he was back in the lineup tonight. Jared Kelenic avoided major injury on Wednesday. He was out of the lineup, but good news for him. But Brian Anderson got his first start for the Brave. And though Brian Anderson didn't really have much to say for his results, 2 very well hit balls in play. Orlando Arcia looked good at the plate. I mentioned this because, Scott, when it comes to this Braves lineup being so good, we talk about it, it's because of the fact that they usually have 2 or 3 MVP candidates. Ronald, Austin, Matt Olson, this year Marcell Ozuna, obviously. But the other big key is because when the bottom of their lineup is producing near the top of the league, this Braves team wins at like a 70 or 75% clip. It was especially with Ronald out. The bottom of this order has to get going again. It was good to see Orlando Arcia and Brian Anderson putting some good at bats in play, and also the way that Jared Kelenic's hit over the past 10 or so games.
Yeah, I like the addition of Brian Anderson for what it is. I think you have to keep expectations in line, but he's a player who at one point with Miami was a really solid major league hitter. And hopefully he can give the Braves a little something off the bench. It does seem like Jared Kelenic avoided a serious injury with that wrist that he rolled up on in Boston. But tonight, facing a left-handed starter, it made sense to be careful with Kelenic and have him sit. You mentioned Orlando Arcia, who was in a pretty terrible slump. He drove a ball well tonight, had a ground rule double, had the home run the other night as well. And you're absolutely right. I think when the Braves were truly at their very best last season, the bottom of the order was feeding the top of the order, and it was just this never-ending buzzsaw. And so far this year, we just haven't ever really had that. And I guess the first couple of weeks during the season, the Braves had it all going, top and bottom. But since then, it's been just a couple of players performing and everybody else not really performing. So let's hope that as the bottom of the lineup hopefully wakes up a bit, and then we're going to talk about Austin Riley here in a moment and the rest of the top half of the lineup. It's only going to help if that bottom half feeds the top. It's only going to help the cause and hopefully get the Braves to be just a little more consistent on offense, because night in and night out, you really just don't know what you're going to get.
Absolutely. And that's where you want the consistency to come from your best players. And Scott, I'll be honest with you, I hope I don't come across as being dramatic when I say this, but as good as our pitching can be, at the end of the day, what really sets this Braves team up for success is their offense. And so, in my opinion, the single biggest factor that's going to get the Braves back to where they truly are in the championship form that they want to be, even without Spencer Strider, even without Ronald Acuna Jr., is seeing Austin Riley get going. I think that besides Acuna over the past several years, Riley's just been that most consistent elite hitter, but he's got to get going. Now I talked with Buster Olney, back a few weeks ago while you were on vacation. I talked with him and he said that Riley told him right before he got hurt and was out for 2 weeks that he felt he was right there. He was almost there to where he was going to find his groove, but then he got hurt. And unfortunately, he's back down, to where he's been, not performing to his usual level. But a couple of factors really stand out to me. Scott, when you look at Austin Riley, obviously he's not performing to the level that you expect. What stands out to you as a factor that may not be going in his favor this year, and it's not allowing for him to produce the consistent elite results we're used to?
Yeah, Austin Riley is a fascinating case. He has seen a ton of fastballs this season. And as a result, he's just been a little off on his timing. And I really enjoyed the interview you did with Buster Olney a couple of weeks ago. And it seemed like Austin was starting to figure it out. And then he missed a full 2 weeks with the side issue. Of course, never went on the injured list, but never had a rehab stint, never got a couple of games in the minor leagues. And now it feels like his timing is just off ever so slightly. And as a result, I think what's really plaguing Austin is his ground ball rate is as high as it has ever been. After tonight, Austin's ground ball rate is 44%. For his career, it's about 38%. So a 6-point jump in ground ball rate. And we don't want Austin Riley hitting the baseball on the ground. We want him elevating it. We want him driving it. We want him hitting it over the wall. And it's just uncharacteristic for him to be hitting this many grounders. I think we've seen Austin over the years just go on these stretches where he's the best hitter on planet Earth for weeks at a time. I think that's probably coming. It's very much within the realm of outcomes. But right now, I think Austin just has to get back to hopefully adjusting his mechanics a little bit and get back to elevating the ball, because that's going to make him successful.
The story with Riley coming into the majors and what allowed for him to make the adjustment that we saw him make in early 2022 when I believe it was 2022, it may have been 21, when he really elevated himself to being one of the best hitters in baseball. The thing that was always out there about Riley was, would he be able to handle elite velocity? And I do think that the league is trying to adjust to where they want him to see velocity more. For instance, 55% of the total pitches that Riley has seen this season have been fastballs. The average velocity on those fastballs is 94.5 miles per hour, the fastest that we've seen it. But this isn't that different from last year, when over half the pitches that Riley saw were fastballs. But what really stands out also, Scott, is that he's been a bit unlucky. For instance, he has a 190 slugging percentage on four-seam fastballs so far this season. His expected slugging is 430. So the thing that I'm getting at is that there's been a bit of bad luck. Now, a lot of that has to do with it's, easier to have bad luck if you put the ball on the ground versus in the air, but he is getting that velocity going. His barrel percentage is a little down. His hard hit percentage is the highest that it's been. So overall, it's not like there's a significant drop in the underlying metrics. There's been a little bit of bad luck, but if Riley can figure out either how to, when Riley goes good, he's driving that ball to right center field, which is a good way for him to adjust when he's seeing a lot of fastballs. If he can get back to doing that, I think that could be an adjustment that could really start to open up to him getting the results he's seeking.
Well, and I think it's a similar tale to what Matt Olson was dealing with a couple of weeks ago. Matt continued to be near the top of all of baseball in exit velocity and hard hit rate, but he didn't really have a whole lot to show for it. And over the past 3 weeks, Matt Olson has been very much Matt Olson that we have come to love and adore so much at the plate, because the results have been much more like last season than the funk that he was in earlier this year. So the thing for Riley, you just have to hope that it balances out. Nobody wants to hear in the middle of a slump or a downturn, oh, it's just bad luck, or oh, it's baseball. That's frustrating because everybody wants results, and I'm sure nobody more than Austin is ready to get out of this funk. But there are, as you just outlined, a lot of reasons for optimism for him. And sure, maybe it's not been the best start to the year, and the injury did not help. But it just feels like it's a matter of time, and hopefully Austin continues to get his timing down, because when he's right, he can turn around anybody's fastball. It just hasn't been that way so far in the first quarter, I guess first third of the season now, which is pretty crazy to say that we're like 60 games into the season.
Absolutely. So at the end of the day, a lot of what Austin is doing should lead to better results, but a few adjustments may be right to make for him to get the better results that he's seeking. Well, one adjustment I can tell you that you can make to your day if you're seeking better nutrition is a great one-stop shop when it comes to the nutrition that you're seeking, and that is AG1 supplement.
Eric Kratz here from FT. I'm a former athlete that really pays attention to his routine. And AG1 every morning before my workouts is something that gets my day going.
Hey, Braun here. AG1 is a foundational nutrition supplement that delivers daily nutrients and gut health support, and it's backed by multiple research studies so you can trust what you're putting in your body.
Unlike other products which only test their ingredients in isolation, AG1 tests their formula as a whole.
Ready for this stat? 97% of people in a research study felt more energy after 30 days of drinking AG1. If I had to recommend one product to support whole body health, it's AG1, and that's why FT is excited to have them as a new partner. Starting your journey with AG1 is a win. Try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D3, K2, and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase at drinkag1.com/foul. That's drinkag1.com/FOUL. Go check it out, FT fam.
So, Scott, I know that you and Brad, y'all did a great rundown of recent Braves news over the past week that has occurred, some signings, dealing with some injuries, what have you. There really wasn't any notable news on Thursday for the Braves, but what was notable and what I think is a great development, what I think is a needed vote of confidence in a young pitcher who I think has very good stuff. Spencer Swellenbach, he struggled against the Red Sox on Wednesday afternoon. Some of it was a bit of bad luck. Others were, him trying to figure out how to get guys out on that strikeout pitch or that put out pitch. But he seems he's going to get another opportunity in the rotation. Now, who he's going to be facing is going to be a tough task, but I am glad that the Braves have seemed to like what they've seen so far from him, and he's going to get another shot at it come next week.
Yeah, I think with Schwellenbach, the stuff is good enough for the major leagues. Now, he very clearly is still learning how to attack big league hitters, which is about as difficult as it gets, right? He's got to learn how to attack when he's ahead in the count, how to attack when he's behind in the count. And you mentioned he's going to face the Baltimore Orioles in Camden next Tuesday night. It's about as difficult of a road start as you're going to make this season outside of maybe New York or Los Angeles. So another tough start on the horizon for Schwellenbach, but at this point, I think his stuff gives him a chance to be successful in the majors as a fifth starter. I think you take him the other options that are in Gwinnett, and all eyes on Schwellenbach because, again, we know how good the top four in this rotation have been. If he can just give them something in that fifth spot, I think you take it all day and at least you run with it until July when you could potentially add somebody at the trade deadline.
Scott, let's look a bit also at the fact that we're starting to see some of these mid-season prospect lists get updated. Hurston Waldrop is getting a bit of a kick up in some of these lists. He was recently in Keith Law's top 50, had a very good debut at AAA. AJ Smith-Shawver, he had a great debut for him in the major leagues, but unfortunately he's on the shelf with that oblique injury for probably another month plus. Obviously Spencer Swellenbach is starting to show on these lists. Owen Murphy arguably had the best start to any pitching prospect in the Braves system, but unfortunately he had Tommy John surgery. I mentioned these names. I know there's been some injuries, but when we look at the fact that after this season, the Braves are likely really going to have to rely on the young depth in their system to fill in the rotation, especially with Spencer Strider coming back from injury. Are you in a better place with how the faith you have in these, internal young pitchers filling out the rotation for the future than you were at the start of the season?
It's encouraging to see the strides that a handful of them have made in the first 2 months of the season. And I think anytime you're talking about young starting pitching, I'm kind of the mindset that I'll believe it when they can do it consistently. It's so difficult to be a young starting pitcher in Major League Baseball and pitch effectively. One of the most difficult things in all of professional sports. But I think you have to be encouraged by Hurston Waldrop, who got off to a bit of a slow start and then has been terrific ever since, getting a ton of swing and miss with that splitter. Had just, of course, made his debut in Gwinnett the other day. You mentioned Smith-Shawver, who has big-time stuff. Really just a bummer that he has the oblique injury. So I was pretty encouraged by what he showed in Wrigley Field that afternoon. And then for Murphy, the Tommy John is such a bummer. It feels like every other pitcher in Major League Baseball right now has an elbow problem, which really sucks. But at the same time, there is some depth here. There's some real talent, especially in the upper levels of the minors. And you're right. I mean, who knows what the future holds, how Spencer Strider is going to recover, what Max Fried's future holds, what Charlie Morton does next season at age 41. There are a ton of questions, of course, for another day. But it is, I guess, a little reassuring to know that you do have a couple of in-house candidates who could be options for you moving forward, because it is very difficult to acquire good starting pitching, especially with so many injuries across the league.
Fellow Hammer Territory podcast member Stephen Tolbert, again, as we mentioned, is will be on vacation, watching the Braves as they're touring the Northeast. He wrote a great piece over at batterypower.com talking about the Braves' approach at the trade deadline and what does it look like for Alex Anthopoulos. And you're right, Scott. Starting pitching. Buster Olney mentioned it. Stephen mentioned it. The price for starting pitching is just so hard to pay at times. That's why Alex Anthopoulos really hasn't made a big move for a starting pitcher at the deadline since 2018 when he caught Kevin Kosman. But I think that there are a few ways in which Alex Anthopoulos typically does try to find things. He tries to find good relievers and make them better once they get to Atlanta, tries to do the same thing for hitters. But you had an observation when it came to those who, hey, maybe Alex can make a good move, right now. Maybe he can strike before other teams do to get something done. But there's an important factor still in play here that makes that hard to really identify where you can find that player, as you alluded to before the podcast.
Yeah, it's going to be a fascinating next 2 months before the trade deadline, because if you go to the MLB standings right now, like all but two teams in the National League are within 3.5 games of a playoff spot. And I know it's June 6th. It's very early. No one's actually looking at the playoff standings right now. But the point I'm trying to make is there's just not going to be a ton of sellers at the deadline, especially with the expanded playoffs and having those 3 wildcard teams. And it's a similar story in the American League. And of course, there were a couple of really bad teams this year, but they don't have a whole lot to trade, right? Like they don't have a lot of move the needle type pitchers that are going to be available. And whenever you're bidding against a dozen other teams at the trade deadline, it's going to be tough for the Braves to get something done. Of course, we have a long way to go. I would imagine the Braves' needs and priorities will shift from early June to late July. But it's going to be a fascinating trade deadline, because teams know all you have to do is get into the dance. I mean, of course, the Braves in 2021, a prime example, a team that struggled at times during the regular season and then got very hot for a month and won the World Series. Last year, the Diamondbacks, team that just crept into the playoffs, ended up making it all the way to the World Series. Diamondbacks could have very easily sold at the deadline last year. And sure, fans wouldn't have been thrilled, but they wouldn't have gotten crushed for it. It was a team that was kind of hanging around 500. They had some struggles lately, and they opted to go for it. It's really going to be interesting to see how many teams actually end up selling and what kind of a seller's market there is, because I would have a hard time believing it's going to be a buyer's market with so many teams in contention.
But the big key for the Braves, Scott, more than anything, of how they can improve the team, will the offense come around, how reliable will the pitching be, is that the Braves just need to need to get back to doing this year what they were so good doing the previous 2 years. That's beating teams that they should beat. You said it perfectly on last night, on the Wednesday version of the Hammer Territory podcast. The Braves have had a very good setup here over the past few weeks, and they haven't taken advantage of it. They were 4-6 against the Pirates, the Nationals, and the A's, before this week. So they've got to take advantage of the next 3 days, especially with the Orioles on deck next week. You've got Chris Sale going on Friday. You've got Charlie Morton going on Saturday, and you've got Max Fried going on Sunday. The Braves need to win at least 2 of those 3 games. It would be great if they can win all 3 with the offense continuing to come alive, but it's a really good setup for them this weekend. They need to take advantage of getting a 3 out of 4 or a series sweep against the Nationals.
Yeah, I said as much on the show last night, and you never want to predict things in baseball because it's a funny game, but it does feel like an important weekend for the Braves to figure some things out. And they got off to a nice win tonight. Maybe not the prettiest of wins, especially early, but a nice win on Thursday nonetheless. And then you mentioned the big 3 is lined up this weekend in DC, because the schedule does get much more difficult. You have the Baltimore Orioles coming up. You have the New York Yankees coming up, the Tampa Bay Rays, even the Detroit Tigers and the Pittsburgh Pirates on the horizon, who are not bad teams this year. So there's no break in the schedule coming up, especially some of the best teams in the American League. So you're right. Again, you don't want to overstate the importance of a series on June 7th, 8th, and 9th here, but a chance for the Braves to kind of get this road trip going in the right direction, because it's going to be 10 games in 11 days, I believe. It's an important trip for the Braves, and let's hope that tonight kind of propels them into a couple more wins this weekend.
Absolutely. And of course, we will have you covered with the next edition of the Hammer Territory podcast coming up on Sunday. But Scott, do you have anything else with us as we, in this, Thursday edition of the Hammer Territory podcast, another needed win now, I believe 3-2 in the month of June. So got that winning percentage where we like it. Anything else from you this evening?
No, Shawn, thanks for letting me fill in here on this Thursday evening. I did want to plug, we talked about it briefly, but Stephen Tolbert had a great article on Battery Power the other day about the Braves and looking ahead to the trade deadline, which I would point people towards a good look at what Alex Anthopoulos has done historically and what it might mean moving forward. So wanted to be sure to plug that. And again, thanks to everybody who's checked out the show. We really do appreciate your support. I know Brad and I are planning to be back over the weekend, and of course, subscribe and tell a friend about the show. We're really off to a great start here, kind of starting from scratch. It felt like we kind of lost our baby in some ways at Battery Power, and now we're back and very happy to be part of Hammer Territory, and of course, part of the good fellas over at Foul Territory.
Yeah, part of the Foul Territory family of podcasts. And of course, it's me, Brad, Scott, and Steven, some variation of us most of the time, but we've had great guests or previous, episodes where we've talked with Buster Olney of ESPN, talked with Mark Bowman of MLB.com, Grant McCauley as well. You'll see some video, Chris Willis, obviously, of Battery Power. Of course, you can find Scott at Scott Coleman 55 on Twitter, as well as myself at StatsSAC on Twitter/X. You can find Foul Territory on all forms of social media, and just make sure you hit that subscribe button where you see the podcast. Wherever you'll see it, that's where we'll be for free. Just hit that subscribe button and you'll get the latest content when it's available. For Scott Coleman, Scott, it was a pleasure. Thank you so much for filling in. My name is Shawn Coleman. Go Braves. We'll talk to you again soon here on the Hammer Territory podcast.